So a little while back, we all got a bit of a surprise when the new S5 IIX was going to include some BRAW features, which is super cool. A lot of people have been wondering where BRAW is on some of the latest Lumix cameras, where previous models had it. And surprise, surprise, we get another little treat with a firmware update for the GH6. I told you guys who watched my previous video on if the GH6 was getting any more firmware updates that I was pretty confident we were gonna get a few more. The reason we haven't got that many is because the camera is a lot more well put together than the GH5 was when it came out. I mean, look at the GH5 number of firmware versus the GH5 Mark II. It's like, well, the GH5 Mark II didn't get that many firmware updates. That's because it pretty much had all the firmware updates that the original GH5 had when it came out. Therefore, it didn't need as much work. I think the GH6 is kind of the same story, although I do wish it had a few more. But speaking of firmware, let's go over what we have in store for us today. So looking at the official page, it looks like this is coming out on the 11th of July, 2023. And so it'll be coming out just less than a week from when this video is coming out, I believe. So there's basically two main features here. So number one is gonna be raw Blackmagic video to Blackmagic video assists and recorders and things like that. So yeah, if you've got those older cameras like S1H and a couple others, I believe, that did BRAW, you're getting BRAW in the GH6 now, which is pretty cool. Obviously not internally because red, but you know, you get the recorder, you get the assist tools, and you are good to go. Number two, we're gonna go over these in more detail soon. Number two is 4K 120, 4K 100p video over HDMI, which I know a lot of people were asking about. So anyway, let's roll it back a little bit, talk about BRAW. So the big features with BRAW are 12-bit BRAW, 5.7K, Cinema 4K, as well as some of the 4:3 anamorphic modes, which is pretty neat. So you're gonna get pretty much all of the flavors of aspect ratios and resolutions that the GH6 offers, just in that BRAW sort of container for those who really like to work with DaVinci Resolve. I believe there's plugins for Premiere, by the way, but of course they didn't mention those here. But I think you can use them in Premiere, but it's obviously gonna be tooled specifically towards Resolve users, first and foremost. So I feel like I kind of buried the lead here, so I want to just expand on this just a little bit. Panasonic had a long history of releasing cameras that were BRAW compatible, and I think that list got up to 6, and then with the GH6 it was missing, and with the S5 II it was missing, and so a lot of people it was messing up their workflow and making them not buy these cameras. Like the GH6 would have been great for some people's workflows, but it just didn't have BRAW. It had Apple ProRes RAW, so there was like 8 cameras with ProRes RAW, and there was like 6 cameras with BRAW. And so now the S1H, the S1, the S5, the GH5S, the BGH1, the S5 II with a code, I think. The S1 might need a code as well. The S5 IIX and the GH6 now all can shoot ProRes or Blackmagic RAW. So you're not pigeonholed into buying one camera or the other. If you want to use Blackmagic RAW, all those cameras are available to you. If you want to use ProRes RAW, and that works better for you if you're like on Final Cut or something, those all work as well. I don't really shoot RAW at all, so this is cool. I'm glad it's an option. Maybe I'll explore it a little bit in the future. But looking into it, it looks like you're gonna want to get the Blackmagic Video Assist 12G HDR, and that's gonna be with a HDMI connection, of course. And that leads us to our second thing here. So it looks like Blackmagic or other HDMI devices are gonna be able to output some of those higher frame rates, which wasn't possible before. I think a lot of HDMI stuff is cut off at 4K 60, and so having 4K 100, 4K 120p going out to external drives, that's gonna hopefully help with this Blackmagic stuff, as well as stuff using like Apple ProRes instead of that. So pretty cool update, fixing a few of those issues that people were curious about. You know, this is speculation time, I suppose, but I almost wonder if there was a bit of a negotiation behind the scenes with Blackmagic and Panasonic, because the GH6 didn't launch with Blackmagic RAW, and it didn't plan on it, and they would never say anything or confirm anything. And that's partially just how companies are. You know, they're not going to reveal all of their tricks and tips and the things they've got planned down the line, even though we wish they would. And then they didn't announce the S5 IIX was going to have BRAW either. So that was another sort of hidden thing that I kind of think it might have just been a licensing thing. Like, are we going to do this? Are we going to include BRAW? What's the thing? Maybe it has something to do with some of these Red lawsuits happening with Nikon, which has been interesting. If you don't know, Red has a patent on internal RAW. Blackmagic sort of gets around it, but everybody else has to externally record RAW, like the GH6, like the S5 IIX. And I wonder if Blackmagic had some kind of hand in that behind the scenes as well, or maybe that's not even related. But either way, it is interesting to me why Panasonic didn't include BRAW in the GH6 in the first place, and they went with the Apple ProRes route, which the Apple ProRes RAW route as well, which I don't know is how many Panasonic cameras have been doing Apple ProRes and Apple ProRes RAW. I don't use it that much, so not the guy to ask. But it does make you think, right? Like, why wasn't it included originally, and why didn't they include that in the marketing for the S5 IIX when it was announced? And rather than like hold off until basically the launch event to talk about BRAW. So I feel like they were negotiations with the S5 IIX to really push that camera even further with the BRAW. And then retroactively, I'm really glad they added it to the GH6, because if you were gonna be pessimistic, you would think, like, why would they bother adding BRAW into this camera that's over a year old at this point? And you know, I think they just do really believe in making sure that camera is the best it can be. And you know, I think a lot of people are gonna want one S5 IIX and one GH6 to pair together, because now with this BRAW update, what it really means is you can have a super high frame rate, anamorphic, 4x3, whatever, micro four thirds camera with a fast readout, or you can switch over to the shallow depth of field, full 6K, better dynamic range, and better resolution, just image quality overall, S5 IIX. So depending on your situation or your scenario or what you shoot, you aren't really limited by these record options, whether it's ProRes or BRAW or internal or external SD, CF Express, fast frame rate, whatever the combination of work and media, all that stuff you do, there's a Panasonic camera out there for you now. Before the BRAW update on the GH6 and before the BRAW announcement for the S5 IIX, it did feel like you were limited. You know, if you had a BRAW workflow with some of your older cameras, that's been taken away, but it's been given back. So that's really cool. I'm glad they're doing it, and I'm glad they're continuing to update the GH6 to meet up with the newer cameras as well, because it's still a fairly new camera, even if it is over a year old at this point. I hope they continue down this line. I hope they add in stuff like the live LUTs and a few other quality of life improvements to the GH6, but I suppose only time will tell. But anyway, guys, this is just a quick video. I wasn't gonna upload this week, but you get a free bonus video. Amazing, and I'm just glad to see the GH6 is getting those firmware updates we just talked about a few weeks ago, and that I was gonna say sorely needs, that it doesn't sorely need anything, but it's just nice to know that they are keeping an eye on it. I do wonder if there's any hidden improvements with you know, some of the stuff people talk about with the GH6. Be very curious to see if there's any under the hood fixes. They say they don't do them, but I'm not so sure. But anyway, guys, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.